Hi everybody, today we're going to talk briefly about mobile threat defense products. Now, mobile threat defense products are apps that can go onto your phone, iOS or Android, and do a little more checking on your phone to make sure that everything looks okay. Now, they're not magic. They actually can only do what your phone allows. And actually, there's a few more things on Android that are allowed than on iOS. So all of the manufacturers, and there's a few, at least a dozen, and maybe less than 10 that Microsoft actually has partnerships with that work well with Intune, which they actually have to work with. All of these companies are just really building their products to do what's available in iOS and what's available in Android. So there's no magic to what they're doing. They're just doing kind of what's available there. And for the most part, what are they doing? Well, really their big added benefit is they are checking the websites that mobile devices go to see if that website's on the naughty list. And also they can see if users are connecting to malicious or unsecure networks, like networks where they connect to a Wi-Fi and maybe the certificate is expired or is improper or something like that. These feed signals back to the central service, and then the central service can report that back to Intune in one of a couple of ways. And that's really what I want to get into today when we talk about mobile threat defense apps. All right, let's talk a little bit about how these MDT products work. I have a little slideshow that I'll go through and talk about the different methods, and then we'll take a brief look at Intune. So mobile threat defense MDD apps can integrate with Intune for either fully managed MDM devices where we are in control over the device itself, or they can work through the MAM channel for unmanaged devices. And of course, this means, if you've been following my series, that we're talking about application protection policies. So somehow these MDT apps can actually work with that. So we'll get into the specifics, but it boils down to this. For MDM devices, these MDT apps can do a little bit more. They can query all the apps, for instance, on an iOS phone, whereas the MAM channel can't do that. So they can do a little bit more, nothing fantastic more, but a little bit more. And the MDM method works with compliance in Intune, which in turn works with conditional access policies in Azure AD. So it's also a little more flexible on what you can actually do with it. The MAM channel, that works through application protection policies. So it's much more specific. And in particular, inside of those policies, it works with conditional launch. So instead of conditional access policy, we're working with a conditional launch policy on a phone, which just means certain apps, the apps that our users use to get to Office 365, will not launch if the MDT signal is over a certain threshold. And again, that's also what we would use in MDM for compliance, and that would lead us to the conditional access. So let's talk about these options just briefly. Full MDM devices requires an Intune connector. You'll actually install this in the administration and tokens. Enforce through compliance and conditional access. You get website protection, so it warns you about or blocks going to certain sites. Unsecure network protection. A lot of robust app detection. It can see what apps are on a device. Some other protections as well. We're not going to get into too many details. MAM only on the right. Well, I put down requires an Intune connector. It really depends on the product as to how they kind of configure it. A lot of times you don't use any connector. You actually use app configuration policies to tell the mobile device app how to work. All right, so we'll focus on that. Enforced through MAM conditional launch, website protection, unsecured network protection, not too many other things that you can do just with the MAM channel, because we don't have full visibility or access to anything else on the phone, really just the app. So we're confined into how it can work and what it can work with. But it adds a nice bit of extra protection. So this screen shows a picture of the connectors and tokens area of Intune. Now, if you're using the full MDM product, you will for sure have to go here. And if you look on the bottom left, you can see a mobile threat defense. This is where you would add your product. And again, follow the instructions from the different carriers. There's Checkpoint. There's a bunch of other ones that don't come to mind right now. I was just looking at the site. I'll show you the website in a few seconds so you can get a full view of it. Oops, hold on one second. So you go down there and you can set up the connector. I have highlighted instead Defender for Endpoint because, of course, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint has a mobile application, a mobile threat defense application that can go onto phones. And that's already incorporated here. Really, I don't have to install anything, but I would configure it. Now for Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, I use this point here to tell it how I'm using the product on the phone. Is it an MDM fully enrolled situation or is it just MAM? And if we read through this list, you can kind of see the difference. The top part is, the second part, I should say, says compliance policy evaluation. That's for MDM, fully enrolled Intune devices. And you notice I have Android, iOS, Windows here. I'm using the Windows MDM, of course. Every Windows machine should be fully enrolled in Intune. They're Windows machines, so we should be controlling them. They should be corporate devices. But you'll notice that I don't have that turned on for Android and iOS in the top. But if you look down at the bottom, under App Protection Policy Evaluation, I have turned them on. So I'm using Defender for Endpoint on both Windows, Macintosh, and my mobile devices. And on Windows and Macintosh, I'm using a full MDM version of it. But for Android and iOS, I'm only using the MAM version of it. All right, so let's move on. Corporate devices with MDM. We got some choices here. We look for compliance, and compliance is from a number of things. It could be secure boot, added on, maybe you've got to have a firewall and a virus. All these things lead to compliance. And if we don't have one of them in place, well, the device is not compliant. Well, another thing that we can put in there is the signal from a mobile threat app that's on the phone or on Windows for that matter. So we use compliance. If you don't meet the threshold, or if you're over the threat threshold, then your machine is not compliant. Okay, then what? Well, the teeth of compliance, of course, is conditional access. And in conditional access, we have a lot of different choices for what we want to do once a machine is not compliant. We can block all access if we want to, or we can block access to selected apps, maybe email, SharePoint, or whatever. We can lock up apps that we manage on the device and not let them work anymore. We can enforce an MFA prompt. We can force read-only access through a web-based access. We have a few different choices here. For MAM, as we'll see, we only have really the one choice, the conditional access, the conditional launch. So corporate mobile devices with MDM, this is a little bit too busy, but again, it requires a connector and it's enforced through compliance policies. I'll show you the list of MDM, MDT vendors in just a little bit. Here's how a compliance policy might look. One of the compliance settings on mobile devices is it jailbroken. Well, maybe I block those. But another one is that I would require the device to be at or under a certain device threat level. This is a signal that comes from the mobile defense app on the phone. Signals back this also back to presumably our console, either Defender or one of the other vendors. But the app is reporting this information back to Intune, and Intune now can use that as a compliance thing. So this device could be not compliant, and then we could do something with conditional access. All right, so here's a visual of kind of how that would work. The device comes into Intune. These are the compliance conditions. Mobile threat defense threat level has to be less than a high threat level. If it is, then, well, they get access. If not, then they don't. And that's done through conditional access policies. And you can see the access here in this middle box says device must be compliant. So nothing new about conditional access policies there, but this is just a visual of how that works. Here is the compliance or the conditional access policy itself. And I guess my picture is not completely covering that. Oops. It's this option right here, require devices to be compliant. And that's, of course, under the grant control. Now, you could do this for Windows, Android, really anything. This one in particular, though, my conditions here would actually be the platform, and I would choose Android and iOS. So any Android or an iOS machine that did not report itself as compliant would not get access. Now, what about MAM? Well, I put in again that it requires a connector. You check with the manufacturer to see the setup process involved. They're all slightly different. It's enforced through conditional launch inside the application protection policy itself. And what are we not launching? Well, what we're not launching are the apps that are being protected by the app protection policy. In particular, the usual suspects: Outlook, Teams, OneDrive, Office, anything that's in that list of apps that know how to play ball with app protection policies. Again, there's a list of MAM compatible MDT vendors, shorter than the full enrollment device list. Most of these are the same, though. All right, so personal devices is what we're really talking about usually for MAM. We choose MAM because we can't get full control over the devices because users don't want to enroll with our service. If they enroll with our service, well, we'll probably end up having to buy them phones, right? So this is a half measure, and we use it for personal devices, and all we're doing is protecting company data that gets synced onto these well-known apps on the phone. We don't mess around with personal data no other settings. We don't have any other control over the phone. All we're controlling are the apps that know how to work with these signals. Again, the usual suspects. All right, so we'll skip through that. Middle bullet, conditional access. Yeah, that's non-MAM apps. MAM policies include a conditional launch, third bullet here, that prevents apps from launching if certain criteria, like the mobile threat defense level, is not in a good state, if it is more than the allowed level. So we'll take a look at an example of that in a second. So connecting the mobile threat defense to Intune with through the mobile application management channel, the app protection policy channel. Well, a lot of times instead of a connector, and this is true with the Defender product, you configure what the app does through an app configuration policy. You'll probably do this even if you use the MDT or the MDM full management route. These policies get sent to apps to tell them how to work. Now, in general, we can't just do this to any app that we're using in MAM. All of these apps have to understand the MAM channel. Well, guess what? If you're a company that makes mobile threat management applications and you want to use this channel, you're going to have to make your app understand this channel and therefore these configuration settings. So you probably will set these up one way or the other. I have set this one up, as you can see, this is for Defender. In particular, it's Defender for Android. You'll actually have to have one for Android and one for iOS because the individual setting names on iOS and Android are different. they'll do pretty much the same thing, but the setting names are different. If you've dealt with mobile devices, you understand that. This one in particular tells the Defender on mobile for Android to increase privacy for users, not to send the websites they're visiting back to the Defender product. That's actually the anti-phishing one here. Yeah, maybe you don't think it looks that way, but that's what it does. It increases privacy, and also for the networking. And it also does a few other things. Detects certificate certificate detection to see if the certificates are compromised. Again, a few things like that we talked about before. iOS has slightly different settings, so just kind of read through the documentation and see what you should put into that area. I like to protect users' privacy. They don't like the fact that websites they visit might get sent up to the Defender product or any other product if it's their personal device. So I make it very clear to them that we're not capturing that. We don't care where you're going. We just want to prevent you from going to bad sites that are known malicious sites. So here's the visual of the mobile application management channel using a mobile threat defense. We use an Intune app protection policy. And one of the things in that is a conditional launch. Now, in conditional launch, we can say, well, if the machine's jailbroken and MAM can detect that, we don't let apps launch, like Outlook, Teams, OneDrive. Again, the usual suspects. Got to have a screen lock enabled. Got to have a minimum OS version. All these things can be reported back through the MAM channel. And then your MDT threat level, again, must be under a certain threshold. We don't use conditional access in the MAM channel. That's why I have it grayed out. We don't use it. We use conditional launch. These apps will not launch if the MDT threat level is over a certain threshold. That's just how MAM works. All right. So do MDT partner apps, like the checkpoints, there's a Cylance, so on, a few others, do they support the MAM channel or the MA or the MDT channel? Well, or MDM channel, I should say. Some support both, some just one. Check the documentation to see if they do one or the other. So here's I think BlackBerry Protect over on the right. It only does the MDM channel. Over on the left, there's another one, Checkpoint Harmony. It does both, and my face is in the way this time because if I move myself out of the way, you can see this number 2 app protection policy is actually missing from BlackBerry. They don't support that channel. They probably will in the near future. Now, this is February of 2023. They just don't right at this second. All right, so here's a look at the conditional launch. Let me get myself out of the way here again. I can see the max allowed device threat level, again, medium, and you can tell that this is an application protection policy. Now, I say the primary MDT, I have a primary MTD service in here. I always mix those letters up, so forgive me if you see them flip-flopped here. Is the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. I don't really need that in there. The only reason I need that line in there is if I actually have 2 products on the machine at the same time, 2 mobile defense products. You might come into that situation. I just put it in here for a visual. But normally if I'm just using Defender, I only need this second one because unless I put something different in here, it's always assumed Defender would be the default. Of course, Microsoft Intune is going to assume that, right? All right. We'll get past that. So that's pretty much the basics. One more thing that I'll mention before we show you a little bit of the Intune screen, which I'm showing you now. Actually, let me start off on the MDT Mobile Threat Defense Partners page. This is Microsoft's page. You can find this. I'll try and remember to put this in the links in the description, as they say. But this is Microsoft's website. If you just look up Mobile Threat Defense Partners and Microsoft, you'll come right here. It talks about the different partners, whether they're MAM or MDM. You see unenrolled devices, enrolled devices. If I open up enrolled devices, plenty of information in here. How to enable it, how to install it, in fact, if you're in the MDM channel. All right. So one thing I want to mention, which is the one of the basic parts of this whole thing, is a VPN on the mobile device, a device-wide VPN. Now, most mobile device manufacturers, I think both of them, only allow one of these. So if you have people that have a VPN that's always on, that's device-wide, this is not going to work well. What is the VPN in these mobile defense apps? Well, it's a trick. It's a loop-back sort of VPN. It doesn't go anywhere. It's used so that the defense app can see the websites you're going to. It kind of loops all of them through that so it can read them. It's a technical thing just so they can read it, because they're not allowed to actually read it directly. So if they direct traffic through this VPN, they actually have a chance to read it. So it's a requirement, whether iOS or Android, that the user actually allows this. And they'll be prompted to allow this. When you walk through it, it'll say, okay, I guess I got to turn this VPN on. Don't really understand it. I recommend you communicating with your users and let them know what this is for. And that's all it's for. Just so we can see the website. And if it's on the naughty list, we block it. Again, you can set up privacy to not send all of the websites to your defense app partner like Defender, because the default is that privacy is not in place. So I recommend, again, read through the documentation, see how to turn that privacy on, and communicate that to your users, especially for the MAM channel, which implies personal devices, because users don't like you keeping track of all the websites they're going to. All right, so let's go through a couple of the screens here. So here's Intune. I've actually gotten into the tenant administration, down here, tenant admin, and connectors and tokens, right? And down here in the bottom left, cross-platform, I see Defender for Endpoint. Yes, this is where I would configure Microsoft's Defender for Endpoint for Windows, for mobile, Android, all that. But right below that, I see Mobile Threat Defense, and this is where I would actually add one of the mobile threat defense connectors, and then I will walk through the setup as per the documentation. Once that's set up, I can actually install the app if it's fully MDM. I got the app enrolled. Or if not, then I'd have to actually go into my app protection policies. I presume you have app protection policies if you're not fully managing mobile devices. Even if you are, app protection policies are a great security tool. So I'm going to go over here to apps, go to app protection policies. And you can see I have a few app protection policies. I'll click on this iOS one here. Go into the properties of it. And I'm going to scroll down a little bit till I get to the conditional launch area. The conditional launch area is the area we want. I'm going to click on edit, and one of the things I get with conditional launch is max allowed device threat level. So once I've gotten my threat app configured and maybe added through the tenant configuration, I can choose this. If it's Defender, I don't have to add anything. I just have to configure a couple things over in that other screen that I showed you. And then we choose the threat level. And it gives you a little bit of information in there. All right. So the second you do that, the second I put anything in here, and I'll probably just choose block. The next time the device apps on a phone that this affects, the next time they check in, they're going to see there's a new condition. That condition being that they have to use this mobile threat defense app. On the phone, they should get a prompt to install it. For a Defender, it comes up right away. It says, hey, your company requires you to install this app. There's a link to it. They go to the store, they install the app, they sign into the app, and they'll have to walk through some permissions because the user is in charge of their phone. This is a MAM policy, so we don't control the phone. So the user has to allow the VPN. The user has to allow the network protections. On an Android, they get a few more questions. They have to allow app lookups, because for Android you can actually do a little bit of app lookups, which uses the safety net, which you kind of already should have through app protection policies that we've talked about in other settings. So they have to walk through a series of, okay, yes, you can do that, you can do that. Another reason to communicate with the users and telling them what we can see, what we can't see, why it's okay to say yes, what each one of those things is using, because again, they're the user's phone and they don't really like stuff like that. All right, one other thing that I will show you, you will almost always do. Under app protection policies, I have app configuration policies. App configuration policies is how we would configure those apps. Now, I showed you a picture of this before where I told you I set up the privacy on Defender, a few other things. I don't have that set up in this particular tenant. That's a different tenant. But this is where you would go to tell the Mobile Defense Threat app how to work. Again, privacy settings, the network settings, looking at what they're connected to. Is this certificate good or not? Those network settings, usually you have to enable those, because for most of the products, including Defender, that's actually not enabled by default. Only the VPN shows up. So you actually have to enable that. So look into it a little bit, read through the documentation, and get it set up the way you want. Okay, everybody, so that's a real brief overview of mobile threat defense apps on phones, mobile devices, Android and iOS. There's different vendors out there. Of course, we would naturally talk about Defender for Endpoint. That is an app that's available in the iOS, the Apple Store and the Google Play Store. If you're using MAM, don't install that ahead of time. It kind of doesn't like that. It's best if the user is prompted to install it once you have the app protection policy in place. And again, the majority of companies out there are using user-supplied phones, so we're using MAM on them. But if you're lucky enough to be in full control of the devices, then you can install them and configure them and do everything. The user doesn't have to do hardly anything to their phones, because we control them. We can do whatever we want. So again, there's two channels, the MDM channel and the MAM channel, very similar in what they can do. You don't get a whole lot extra in the MDM channel with these defense apps than the MAM channel. The MDM channel has a couple of more options, like the apps that it can look at in iOS and Android. You can get a full list of apps. And also, since you're going into that channel, your teeth of it is conditional access policies. And in conditional access policies, you have more options as to how you want to curtail the user's access. In the MAM channel, you still get pretty good protection, added protection that you don't necessarily get with MAM, but you're limited in what you can do. It's conditional launch. Those apps will not launch unless the mobile threat level is at a certain level. Right. So that's it. Stay safe on the internet and stay safe in Office 365. We'll see you next time.